Hello, everybody. Do you train in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Are you a white belt or a blue belt? If you are, we're going to have 6 reasons why you should be competing in Jiu Jitsu tournaments. I'm John Connors. This is Power of the Tribe podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Dan Robin. And Dan, we're going to give them 6 reasons why they must be competing in Jiu Jitsu tournaments. If they're white or blue, matter of fact, any belt, but we're going to put white and blue in the title because
if they're already competing, this might get their head around what they're accomplishing.
Yeah, it might clarify things for them. Definitely, Dan. Good point. And so we have great information here. If this sounds interesting to you, please subscribe to this YouTube channel of this podcast and hit the notifications, and you'll get more good information. So, Dan, I want to get right into it. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I don't care how you're doing at all.
At all?
Usually I feign that I do, but no. But why should people compete?
Right.
All right. I'm going to start with probably the best reason right out of the gate. I'm not going to hold the good stuff back. So, number one, Dan, there's very few guarantees in life. That old cliche, death and taxes, right? Here's a guarantee. If you compete, I don't mean just once, but if you compete consistently in jiu-jitsu, you will get better. It's unavoidable. Guaranteed. It's impossible not to.
Would you guarantee it for once? Maybe not.
I think if you competed once, yeah, you'd get better. Yeah, definitely. But I think people probably should just make it part of their whole training, their whole development, is that they consistently compete. If they do that, they have to get better, without a doubt. Which brings me to my number 2 reason. Dan, let's imagine you're training and you have a tournament in 4 weeks. What is that going to do to your training?
It's going to emphasize that you can't slack off.
Can't slack off. You're going to have a sense of urgency. You're going to be more motivated than ever, right? You got to get in there and you're like, holy cow, I'm going to be competing in a month. I don't want to look like a fool out there, right?
Right. And might even affect other things like your diet, or you're going out drinking. You might be like, I gotta practice tomorrow. I can't.
Did you look at my notes?
I did not.
Yeah, it brings urgency to your training. You're going to be more motivated than ever. And that brings me to another benefit, which you just said. You're going to eat healthier because you want to be at a healthy weight. You don't want to go in there a big tubby and be overweight, right? You want to go in there at a very healthy weight. I'm currently not at my best weight, but we're still in the lockdown a little bit. We're coming out of it.
I'm working on it. But if I had a tournament coming up, I'd work harder on it.
Yeah, I'd eat way healthier. I'd be at a healthy weight if I had to compete. And what else did you say? Oh, you wouldn't drink as much. That's probably true, right?
Well, some people listening don't drink that much.
Oh, right. But in general, you would
a lot of people do.
You would have a healthier lifestyle all around. Yeah.
Yeah, like you might work on your cardio. You might be like, let me do a little extra mile on the treadmill because I got to get ready for this tournament.
I got to get ready. And I think what it'll do, see, what I advise my students to do is, instead of just collecting techniques, I try to advise them to get effective at a smaller number of techniques. So go a little bit more narrow, a little bit more deep. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm worried about jumping ahead in your notes now.
Don't worry about it. Fire away, bud.
But one part is the first thought of anyone that doesn't compete is going to be like,
what is it?
There's a big hurdle to do it. It's a big scale. Like if you haven't done it, especially in jiu-jitsu, there's a big barrier. You're nervous.
So what are some of the reasons why somebody wouldn't compete? What would they say? One thing they might say is, I don't want to get hurt. Right?
Right. That's
a legitimate concern, especially as a white belt. There's probably more injuries in competition than training. Maybe. And white belts definitely tend to have more injuries because, they don't know when they should zig or zag. They're still learning the lay of the land. But I will say this. Jiu-jitsu competition as a sport is much safer than a lot of other activities. I would bet statistically, I don't have the data, so I'm just winging it. I'm going to come up with a model. I'm just winging it. It's safer than downhill skiing, without a doubt. Safer than pickup basketball. You know what I mean?
Yep.
You got people running around, bumping into each other. Just safer than a lot of sports, a lot of other activities.
And again, it's not total guess, right? How many matches have you been around? over the last 25 years. You've seen,
Okay,
you
that's
haven't seen that many injuries, right? I mean,
I haven't seen that many injuries. Yeah. I think I saw, that's a good question. Way less than a handful.
and
Yeah.
you could mitigate it too, because
Right.
if people are going for a world championship, then you start going, I'm not going to tap no matter what. And I'm going to, and you're going to brave.
Well,
Like if you watch a UFC, they're going to fight through an
oh,
armbar.
right.
It's their profession.
Right.
You might not, you might be like, I'm caught. Like,
Most of the injuries, Dan, for more amateur players, it happen when they are getting taken down. So they might land on their shoulder in an odd way, maybe break their collarbone or separate their shoulder. Something
but it's
like
another
that.
risk you could mitigate. You could plan.
Totally
You
mitigate
could
it.
plan the takedown or plan
Exactly.
how it's going to go.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so if you had to go out there and compete, match starts on your feet. So the first thing you're going to want to know is, how can I pull guard effectively, or how can I have an effective, safe takedown that I can master and be ready to go, be effective in 4 weeks. This is what I tell my students. If you have a takedown and you're not effective with it, it's going to work against you instead of for you. So if I go out there in a tournament and I try to do a takedown that I haven't mastered to the point of being relatively effective, so what does that mean, effective? You can get 50% of the time against a resisting person, you can make it work. If you can't make it work at all against a resisting person, then it's going to work against you. You're going to go try it, and then you're going to get countered, or yeah, you might fall on your head in a weird way. Who knows what's going to happen? So you want to get that part straightened out. But if you're going to compete, you're going to address that. You're going to figure that out. So
Can I bring up another big barrier, I think,
Okay.
to competing? You've pointed this out yourself.
all right,
A lot of people at the compete because they're like, I'm good. I'm crushing it in the gym.
right,
You have a huge section of jiu-jitsu athletes who are like, I'm not crushing it in the gym. So I'm going to get crushed myself. I'm going to lose. They're not like, I'm not the best guy in my gym.
that's legitimate.
You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like, I'm sort of getting tapped in my gym. Why do I want to go compete if I'm getting tapped here? Because
Okay.
I feel like I will get tapped there as well.
totally understandable, reasonable. My answer to that is, what's the harm with you going getting tapped there, especially if you're already getting tapped here? Is it that different? What's the big deal?
But that's a big point, though, right? Like, that's a big mindset change
I think so.
to actually embrace I could lose and it's not a big deal.
Yeah,
That's a huge point, actually.
I think
If
it's
you can,
huge.
in fact, if you can get that into your mindset overall.
Here's the thing. What are they afraid of? When I go to compete in jiu-jitsu, why am I nervous? What are competitors really afraid of? They're really not, for the most part, I don't think they're afraid of getting hurt.
It's
What do you-
embarrassment.
Embarrassment, which means loss of status. So they feel that people will think less of them, their friends, or maybe their acquaintances, or maybe people that are almost strangers will think less of them. And the reality is they might, but it doesn't matter. It's like, it will not change your life a single iota if people think a little bit. And if
And
they're
that's
your
a worst case scenario.
That's
because
worst case scenario.
Probably they won't think less of you.
No, if they're your friends, they won't. But even if they did a little bit, whatever you lost, you could easily regain by just, people are going to really respect you by the way you carry yourself on a daily basis, the way you train, the way you present yourself, the effort you put in. That's what people really respect. So the wins and losses, they actually move that status in a smaller way than people think. And whatever status you do lose, you can recover it, and it doesn't really matter. The reason why people are sort of unconsciously afraid of losing status is, through most of our natural history, that meant a big deal. If I was in a tribe of 50 and I lost enough status, when the food got short, I'd be the last one to get fed. And when women were looking for mates, I might be the last one they're looking for. So my gene lineage might be up against it. It might actually be an existential threat. That's not the issue anymore. So I think if we can get our heads around that, we're only risking a little bit of status that doesn't really matter anyways.
And one more point is that I think a lot of people might think they lose status in the gym and their teammates, but I would say that's the least risk of all, because jiu-jitsu, you're always proving, like, people know you're
Right.
jiu-jitsu.
Right.
You
And
know
if
what I
you're
mean?
that guy in the gym, Dan, that's getting the worst of it, and you go to the tournament and you get the worst of it, how did you lose anything?
Yeah.
It doesn't
Or
matter.
or if you're very good and you lose, it's not like people will be like, oh, it turns out you're bad. It's like, no, you're still good. I feel
Right.
you're good. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
you're still better than me, or you're
Right.
still good in whatever level you are. You know, people know your level of jiu-jitsu. You can't fake it in the gym. So no matter what happens in the tournament, everyone in the gym will still know your level. Is that fair to say? You know what I
Definitely.
mean? Now it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I thought you were bad. It turns out you're good because you won. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
it doesn't work that way. Like,
No.
they'll,
And over time, all the fluctuations kind of smooth out. So the people who are the most technical in jiu-jitsu and the best, they tend to win most of the time. You know, it's not that uneven. It's not a lot of luck involved. The higher you climb in jiu-jitsu, luck plays less and less of a role, I think. It's more like chess. Just the better player tends to win. Here's an interesting idea, Dan, for my number 3 reason why you should compete. It puts the enemy outside the academy walls. So when your team is competing often, you're competing against those other guys, those other teams. So you have a greater sense of camaraderie in your academy. And if you never compete outside, if nobody's competing, guess where the competing is happening? Right in there. Yeah. So then I see you, and I want to get over on you.
like, my arch enemy is in the academy.
Exactly.
That's interesting because other team sports have it built in. That they're, that
Right.
the enemy, they have that camaraderie built in. Like
Right.
That common foe built in.
Right.
Whereas jiu-jitsu doesn't unless you compete.
Then you have a sense of shared suffering because you're both trying to develop and go out there. And then you feel happy about your teammates when they win. It makes the training much better because you don't need to get over necessarily on your training partner to feel good about yourself. You can focus on your development. You can focus on their development.
And even someone getting over on you, if you're both going to a tournament, I would assume you could feel like, hey, you're getting really good. Like, you know what I mean? Instead of feeling like, oh, you just passed my guard for the first time, you're like,
Oh, right.
hey, you're getting good. Like, you know what I mean?
I
As
think
opposed
so.
to everything being butting heads and competing
Yeah.
with them, you could be like, you should use that pass. That's really
Right.
effective.
Right.
Like, it's like that common goal.
Right. You can feel a sense that you're sharing in their success a little bit because you're seeing them go out there demonstrate their improved performance. Where if they weren't going out there, then it's just
You might
they're
even
getting
feel,
better than them.
You might even feel bad, right?
Yeah.
Like, if
Definitely.
they're getting good, that might make you feel bad.
Yeah, which would be a total shame, right? Here's another reason, Dan. Reason number 4 why everybody, white belts, blue belts, purple, brown, everybody, black belts, everybody, you'll know where you stand in your rank. You know what I mean? You can legitimize your belt rank. You know, people sometimes they get a belt, they get a purple belt, and they're like, "Gee whiz, do I really deserve this?" They
I'm
feel
familiar with that feeling. Yes.
they feel a little squishy about it.
Yeah.
Well, if you're competing all the time, let's say you're a brand new purple belt and you go and you compete and you win a couple of matches and you lose and then you don't medal, but hey, you won a couple of matches. That would be pretty good evidence that you are
Even
legitimately a purple belt.
Just
Yeah,
win
even
one.
one, right? Exactly. Yeah. I think it can take away those insecurities that some people might have, that they don't somehow deserve their rank. And this goes hand in hand with it. Number 5, you keep yourself honest. Like when you're out there testing your skills, testing your art, when you go out there and you compete against somebody and you're trying to strangle them and they really don't want you to strangle them and they're trying to strangle you, and then whatever you do, your jiu-jitsu ends up working, that's a pretty good feeling, right? Like you're really keeping yourself honest. If you think about it, are there any, those fake martial arts, like those weird things where they do no-touch stuff and people fall over? They're not competing in any sport. Like you can't be competing in a sport and then still do the fake magic stuff. Right. They're completely irreconcilable. You can't do it, right? So it's sort of like guardrails that keeps you on the path from getting dishonest or deceiving yourself. Does that make sense?
2 things. One is I'm thinking, like, just to reiterate your point, you're sort of like, that definitely works. Like, he definitely did not want me to,
right.
He definitely was trying his hardest. Whereas in the gym, I guess this is the other point, that there's always like sort of like, well, this guy's a higher belt than me. Maybe he let me do it.
Oh,
or
right.
Maybe he's going easy, or maybe he's, not, he purposely letting me pass because he's working on, like, I would say you don't get quite as direct feedback where you're sort of like, I'm not positive
Right.
that I could do that again if he was
Right.
resisting as hard as he could.
But if you're out there competing, I'll tell you, Dan, there's nothing that feels as good as getting somebody's back and doing a rear naked choke and forcing them to tap. That is just like, wow, that's just, I feel great. That really works. Just a great feeling. Okay, point number 6. I know I'm whipping through these. You will learn what you need to work on. Let's say you go out there, you have this takedown that you think is pretty cool. It seems to work in the academy, and then it just doesn't work.
It never worked
in competition. That you need to fix that or figure out another takedown. Or you go out there and the guy leg locks you, and you feel like, I don't know what the hell just happened. Well, now I know what I need to work on. So for the next 6 months or whatever it is, this is what I'm working on. I can't let that happen again. Or if you got guillotined. Well, I never tapped a guillotine in a competition, but if I did, man, I would make damn sure that would never happen again. I would learn every way to defend the guillotine. And when you take it technique by technique like that, it's totally doable. You can really figure the defense out to one specific technique if you really put your mind to it. And then you'll be motivated because you'll have that sort of pain of losing. Like, I never want that to happen to me again, Okay, now we're already in the bonus round, Dan. I'm on point number 7, why everybody should compete.
So you said 6 points, but you've got more points.
Actually, I got a few more, but if you put more than 6, I think, in the title, you scare people off.
You're like, I don't want to listen to
They don't want to listen to us anyways, but then if they have all those points, it's going to take too long. But we're moving fast. Okay, point number 7 is it's a great way to improve your self-image. So hear me out. So I competed, I don't know when the heck it was, but I competed at the no-gi pans, I think it was, and I competed at the ultra heavyweight. So there's the big guys, and I'm not an ultra heavyweight. So I was training with the big guys in my academy who are really good, and I was hanging with them, and I felt good about where my jiu-jitsu was, and I thought, yeah, I think I can compete with these big guys. And then I went, and I had a match. Guy was really powerful, big, good, and I just barely won, but I won. I ended up sweeping him with like 5 seconds left or something, and I won the match. And then I had a really good feeling because then I felt, wow, I know I can compete with these guys now. You know what I mean? I might have thought I had before, but when you go out and you do the thing, that really changes you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Profoundly different. I'm like, wow, I can do this. This is a great feeling. I thought I could. Now I know I can do it. So I think you can only get that by probably competing,
Right. Similar to what we said earlier, like even if you're doing well against the big guys in the gym, it's sort of not the same level of proof, right? It's not the same level of 100%.
Right.
Everyone's going 100%. Even if they sort of are, you know what I mean? It's still not quite the same.
It's not the same. And you have all the unknowns. You don't know what to expect from the guy. You don't know what he's going to do. You don't know how strong he is. Like your training partners, you start to get a feel for what they're capable of, right? There's less unknown, so it's in some ways it's a little easier, right? Here's a thought I had, Dan. Jiu-jitsu competition, it's like a virtual reality game of fighting. You know those VR things you put the headset on and you're in a place, you're fighting, you're doing things. They call jiu-jitsu fights. They say fights. It's not really a fight. You know what I mean? I tend to say matches. Yeah, but it's kind of the vernacular in the community to call them fights. But nobody's punching anybody or kneeing anybody in the face or elbowing anybody. I think of MMA as fights, kickboxing as fights, boxing as fights. I think of them as matches. But for a lot of us, it feels like a fight. Because when you first start getting into competing, you're that nervous like it's a fight. And the guy is trying to strangle you or break your arm or your leg or something. So it feels like fighting. But here's the reality. It's perfectly safe. That's why it's like virtual reality. You feel like you're in danger, but you're not. So you get to safely have that experience again and again and again. And it's just a great opportunity. And but instead of the virtual reality where you're not even moving, like getting any exercise, you're actually doing something that's healthy for your body.
Well, I actually talked about I don't know if it becomes the same thing, but I mean, generally human beings love to simulate dangerous situations.
Right.
Like what's a roller coaster?
Yes.
Right, do you know what I mean? Like
Horror
it's like,
movie or something.
yeah, a horror movie or a million things. Jump,
Yeah.
parachuting, or you're sort of like, there's not real danger here,
Right.
but I like the feeling of that there's real danger.
Definitely.
It's like simulated real.
Yeah. Like another reason people say they don't want to compete, Dan, they'll say, well, I'm really doing it for the self-defense, not sport jiu-jitsu. Combat sports is different than street self-defense. And my response to that would be, well, it's like a fight. It's this virtual reality fighting. So if you were a strong competitor, you competed a lot, it would have to help your self-defense. You would just be sharper in everything that you do. You'd be used to operating under stress. It would just have to make you better at defending yourself. Even if you didn't do exactly the same things on the street that you would do in a jiu-jitsu match, you just put your mind and body in a stronger place to operate from. What do you think about that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right. Again, it's so one of the big things of a problematic transfer from the gym to a street fight or a self-defense is an adrenaline rush, right?
Right.
You're just not used to it,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a whole different thing. And so
Right.
this comes closer, right? Like
I
it
think
lets
so.
you operate under stress and pressure and adrenaline.
Not to mention, competition, especially the competition we have today, it's like the best testing ground for what works and what doesn't work. When you see like John Danaher's team, Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin and those guys, the reason why they're the best in the world is because they've been competing constantly for a long time. Like you can't not compete and suddenly be the best in the world,
Right.
And whatever they're doing probably works better than anything else we know in that realm. So they know how to choke you or strangle you unconscious better than anybody does, because they're doing it against really skilled, strong, talented athletes who don't want it to happen, and they can still do it. So that's why I think it's so powerful, competition and looking at the best competitors of the world can only make you better in everything, self-defense or jiu-jitsu, however you wanted to do it. Here's another reason, Dan. Competition will help you stay focused on development. So developing your technique and your game, as opposed to like petty status stuff. Like if nobody's ever competing, life can get very political. So you're in the gym and there's different belts, but nobody's competing. You start focusing on that. I don't want to look bad. I'm a purple belt. I don't want to look bad with a blue belt or a white belt. You know what I mean? You can start to like not train. You could start to do your jiu-jitsu in a way to protect your status instead of developing yourself. If I know I'm competing, I know I got to get better because the other competitors are getting better. So I have to focus on getting better, which is really how I want to train. And if I'm not focusing on getting better, what am I focusing on, Dan? Protecting my ego, protecting my status, and then I can end up unwittingly limiting my development dramatically by not focusing on getting better. But if you have that hanging over your head that we have to compete in 3 weeks or whatever the heck it is, then you're going to focus on getting better. You don't have time to focus on anything else. And it just makes your whole jiu-jitsu experience better if that's what you're focusing on, and more productive.
It just a point popped into my head about this idea of like getting more custom. People say I want self-defense, and you're saying this will help you with the street situation.
Yeah.
It just popped into my head that there's many videos online of these longtime competitors getting into a situation in the street.
Oh, right.
And they're always dead calm. Right?
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's
funny to say
demonstrable.
that,
Do you know what I mean? It's demonstrable. It's not like guessing.
Yeah.
A lot of the longtime guys that have competed, some drunk bothers them or something, and like they're just dead calm.
Right. Somebody mentioned that Ryan Hall had an incident that was on video where some drunk guy was harassing him, and he was able to pretty calmly and easily totally diffuse the situation and incapacitate the guy.
No tension or no...
Didn't hurt himself, didn't hurt the other guy. I remember seeing another video where some drunk guy was bothering Matt Serra, and then before you knew it, Matt Serra's mounted on the guy, trying to calm the guy down, and the guy's thrashing about, and he's just basically effortlessly controlling this guy and dominating him. That's what jiu-jitsu is about. You'll hear Danaher say it a lot, that it's a system of control that leads to submission, but control is a big part of it. Like you've probably heard the old bromide position before submission. You know, he modified it a little bit. Danaher says it's control before submission. And if you think about it, that's what it's all about. You're trying to control another human body. So if you're really good at that, it's going to help you in a self-defense situation. And that's why it's so good for law enforcement to study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Somebody's resisting arrest, it's all about controlling that person in a safe way. And Jiu-Jitsu, I can't think of, I suppose you could come up with a law enforcement like specific curriculum that would be ideal, but short of that, just Jiu-Jitsu is probably the next best thing that they could be doing.
Right. And the point you were making too is it's not just that they didn't get hurt in these situations, it's that they were able to not hurt the other person, not beat their head in or whatever else, which puts also, there's two things about that. One is it's safer legally, right? Like you're not going to get in trouble fighting if you're like, I'm holding them down.
Yeah.
And I'm not hurting them.
Right.
And then secondly, the reason I think that they don't hurt them is because they don't have a status on the line and their ego on the line. Right. They're not like furious that someone confronted them and like, watch me beat the shit out of them. Right? They're just sort of like, you're not a threat to me.
They're not that adrenalized. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not that adrenalized. They're not like, they don't feel like they have to show to everyone there how completely they could be like, look, I can kick his ass. They're like, we all know I can. I'm just going to hold him. I don't really need to. I'm not angry. I'm not furious that you confronted me, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we've said this before, that anyone that trains gets less angry about confrontations, generally speaking, outside of the gym, because their ego's not as much on the line.
Yeah, and you get to express your aggression in a healthy, socially acceptable way. Yeah. And if you don't have that, I don't know, maybe it gets pent up a little bit and comes out in ugly ways. Who knows? Here's another good reason, Dan. If you go to compete, you can learn new techniques from other competitors and new approaches, new styles that maybe you're not seeing at your academy or someplace else. I remember back in 2000, Dan, I went as a blue belt and competed at the Pan Ams down in Florida. And what struck me watching the other competitors is that it may seem typical today, but it was new to me. They fought the pass extremely hard. Like guys would almost be passed and they would turtle, they would hold the other guy's pant leg, they would fight to the bitter end. They'd be 99% passed and keep fighting, and then they would regain their guard and the guy wouldn't score passing points. And that was a revelation to me as a naive blue belt. I was like,
you weren't going.
I didn't realize you could do that. I was like, oh, when they're kind of passed, then they're passed. And I'm like, oh no, you can just go berserk and like fight that pass like you were fighting for your life. And a lot of times they're not going to be able to finish the pass. And that was a whole new thing for me that I learned at that tournament. So if I didn't go to that tournament, I would have never figured that out. And I'm sure there's other examples of this that people have. They go to a big tournament and they see people doing things in a new way and go, oh, I wonder if that's effective. I wonder if I can use that. Just another small benefit.
It's also just another feel. Like when you go up against a 270-pound Hulk, you might learn something, right? You're like, this was effective. I thought this would be more effective. I thought this would be, and this one actually, this sweep was effective, and you know, and just more information.
Yeah, more new information, definitely. Here's another really funny reason I found out. Dan, if you compete, your spouse will let you train more.
So, because it's a reason.
Yeah, if you think about it, there's a lot of people that are training who have families and kids and a job and a spouse, and you know, I currently don't have a spouse, but you do. But there's always a negotiation of how are we going to spend our resources of time and whatever, and there's a little bit of negotiation there. So one of our students is competing. So there's a tournament up in New Hampshire Saturday that our team is going up to. So Alex Rose mentioned that to me. He goes, yeah, he goes, I got in here 4 times this week, and my wife was like, oh, you're competing? Yeah, you got to get in there and train, because she didn't want him not to perform well.
Right. To be clear, you're not saying tricking your spouse. It's like you have a legit reason.
Yeah, you have a more compelling reason to go train because you're going to compete. And for most people, their spouses are going to want them to do well and be at their best to compete, so they're going to encourage them maybe to train a little bit more. So I just thought that was a funny benefit that I never thought of. Yeah. Like when you when you're competing, your spouse will let you train more. That's pretty cool, right? Here's another one that should have been up front, Dan. It's fun and exciting to compete, and you have a chance for like a small bit of glory. You get a medal, you get to stand on a podium, maybe.
That's a good point. How often in life do you get a shot at any sort of glory?
Not a lot for most of us, right?
I don't think I've had any.
Yeah. When's the last time you got a medal?
I think elementary school.
Spelling bee. Yeah. Yeah. So that's pretty cool, right? It's pretty exciting. Yeah, I think it's fun. It's exciting. So that's kind of cool. So the other sort of reason I get from people who say they don't want to compete is because they get too nervous. And I totally understand this because I get nervous myself. And that some of us just have more anxiety about these types of experiences than others, just that way our nervous system is, right?
Right. And I think a lot of people did not expect that you get nervous. You seem kind of stoic. But
Maybe, yeah.
And it was like in past podcasts, you brought up, you were like, it's not the case. You used to get very nervous, right?
Definitely. But I thought about this a lot, Dan, and here's the thing. I think the very nervous, that type, that group of the population, they actually have the most to gain. If they can go through with this and find a way to deal with that nervousness and go out and compete, when they finally get a handle on that, man, that's going to be a huge benefit in the rest of their life. Everything else is going to get easier. Public speaking, whatever it is, negotiating a deal. Once you got out there and done some jiu-jitsu or somebody's trying to strangle you and you've got over your nerves and you had a good performance, all the skills and tactics you've learned to help you do that, you can apply it to other difficult things in your life. So, there's a small percentage of people where they never get nervous for whatever reason. Good luck. Hey, they're lucky. But a lot of us are nervous. Some of us are super nervous, right? But those super nervous types, if they can ever find the wherewithal to compete, they have the most to gain from the experience out of all of us.
Yeah, it's overcoming a big hurdle. And I think we've talked, I don't know if this is too tangential, but I've mentioned before how my son at a younger age, I signed him up for wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like he, didn't really want to do it. He wasn't super nervous, but it was something that, you're in 8th grade, which is like a lot of peer pressure, peers looking at you, and you have to go up in front of all the other kids in your grade and like wrestle someone and win or lose. It's hard. And I was always trying to tell him, like, I know it's hard, but I actually think at some level you reroute your nervous system. You affect your nervous system.
Definitely.
And that's not just for a kid, it's for an adult too. You affect it. And so now I think of it in terms of like the last year, it's like all these kids like real hard because of COVID and lockdowns and quarantine. And I feel like his nervous system is equipped to handle this kind of stress. Like it's like, well, this is stressful to not, have in-person classes, but it's like not as stressful as going up in front of everyone and wrestling.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
And I think it's a parallel example, but it's the same thing you're saying. Like if you are someone that gets nervous, you can sort of retrain your nervous system.
Right. And you're actually,
that's
a great point, Dan. You're retraining it in a totally safe environment that has no consequences. So if you fail in the tournament, there really is no consequence for that. If you fail in a business meeting, there might be real consequences. So you might as well do that failing in your jiu-jitsu tournament and find a way to deal with the nervousness. There's one other bit of advice I would give to people when it comes to competing like this, and it would be have it in your head that you're going to compete many, many times. It's just going to be part of the program. Because if you think you're going to compete one time, it puts so much weight on that one event that it's too much. And if you're nervous to begin with, then you're going to be really nervous because you're going to have one chance. You know how they have that they have this Haymakers for Hope around here. They do a charity. They do a great job of raising money for cancer, and they get people. But it's largely people training and they're having one boxing match in their entire life, Dan.
Right.
And I got to think that's got to be so stressful. And if you're the guy or gal that goes out there and loses, it could have a more psychological pain than it would otherwise, than if they had, 20 matches or something.
That almost works the opposite of what I was saying, right? Like you could come out like feeling worse about yourself.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? If
Yeah.
you were really, say for jiu-jitsu, you were really good in the gym, you compete once and you lose, you might feel worse instead of
Yeah.
working it through and feeling better.
Well, that's a good point, Dan. Do you want to play devil's advocate? Can you think of a reason why somebody really shouldn't compete that I hadn't thought of or addressed right now? Could there ever be a negative outcome from somebody competing?
Related to what I just said, if you lose and lose and lose and you're like, oh my God, I'm just getting killed out there, and you feel worse about yourself. I think that might be an underlying concern for people that don't want to compete. Right?
So let's say you're a white belt and you go out there and you start competing, and you just never win any matches. But sooner or later, you're probably going to start winning, right? It's going to take a while, maybe. For some people, it might take a while, right? You got to be realistic, right? There's always a bell curve of talent and ability and everything, right? So, I don't know. Or maybe you go out there, you say, I'm going to do 20 matches as a white belt. And if you lose all 20, then maybe you go, screw it, I'm not going to compete anymore. I mean, but it would be a worthwhile experiment, right?
Yeah.
Oh, here's another idea that my son Rory came up with. He's such a smart guy. He said, you know what would be a worthy goal? A worthy goal would be to train yourself to compete with the same level of sort of equanimity that you'd have in the training hall. So that the way you come in and just train and practice with your team, if you can find a way to have that same expression of your jiu-jitsu in competition, that'd be a pretty worthy goal, because it would be about sort of taming this anxiety and nervousness. So I like the way he put it like that.
I feel like he's someone that might be pretty close to that.
He's pretty close to that. Yeah, he's probably doing it already. Yeah. Yeah, I'm still getting there. I think the last match I had was pretty close to that. Yeah.
So I guess another argument about the worst case scenario, someone's like, I tried 20 times, like 20 matches, I lost all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You're still all right? Like you still sort of faced your...
You didn't die, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you still faced your demons. You
Right.
still actually could benefit, right? You could be like...
Let me say this, Dan. What if the person who went 0-20 as a white belt, if they never competed, are they going to be better or worse as far as skill level after they're 0-20? Or if
a skill level, though.
Let's say
they'll be better skill level.
They would be better. So let's say they did 20 matches in 2 years or something, and they lost all of them. At the end of that 2 years, they're probably going to be better than if they didn't compete at all, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, isn't that what we're trying to do? Get better at this art, get better at jiu-jitsu. So even if you lost all 20, you can make an argument that you're still better off than if you never competed.
Right, and you might realize, like, again, you might have been like, I faced my fears. You might also realize, like, hey, people still like me in the gym, like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Things like that,
Right.
where you're like, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
The world didn't end,
Yeah,
right?
the world didn't end. Yeah.
And you may find that you need to change your training modality. You're not training the right way. Maybe you're not at the right academy. There's a famous world champion, Felipe Costa, who was champion at black belt, but he didn't win any world championships in the other belts, and he had to change the way he trained. And one of the changes he made at black belt was he started only training with competitors around his size. So he's a relatively smaller athlete, and prior to that, he trained with all different sizes in the gym, and he found that wasn't optimizing his competition game. So then, to become the world champion, he limited his training partners to people right around his size. Sounds obvious now, but apparently it wasn't obvious to him, and he found out through competing and not winning to a certain degree to figure that out. So, like we said, yeah, you're going to get information when you compete as well. Yep. Yeah, and I try to tell my students, just make it part of your overall training and development, and maybe have a long-term goal. I'm trying to tell a lot of my students, you should try to have your goal to be a black belt masters world champion at some level, right? Could be master 8 or whatever the hell it is. But almost all of us can have that as a somewhat realistic long-term goal, I think, right? And then what are you going to do today to move closer to that goal? What are you going to do this weekend? Well, there's a tournament. Well, you should probably do the tournament, because that's going to get you closer to that goal than if you don't do it. So that's it, Dan. I'm getting off my soapbox. That's why I think everybody should compete. White belts, blue belts, purple, brown, black. The academy owners like myself, it's hardest for us to compete because we're always feeling like we're losing status. We're in that ego trap where our students can sometimes put us on a pedestal, and then it can make it even more painful to lose. So
there's a fair summary that there's guaranteed gains if you do it, and you might.
Yeah.
And the realization on the other side is that the things you fear aren't that bad. Like
it's not that bad at all. Definitely. Okay, Dan, let's wrap it up. So, folks, please subscribe, tell your friends about this, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.